Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment of our Career Insights series, Librarians and Archivists, Taxonomists, and Museum Careers. My name is Jihyun Ju. I'm a advisor and program coordinator here at Beyond Barnard. I'm seeing our Director of Advising and Programs in the audience, Amanda Dye, as well. So we'll be hearing from 5 Barnard alums today. Thank you so much to our panelists for making the time to join us for this event. The bios of our alums can be found in the chat. I'm going to drop it in just a sec. And today's event will be co-moderated by the Director of Collection Strategy, Access and Engagement, Liam Adler, and the Associate Director of Barnard Archives and Special Collections, Ogden Mondesier. There will be an audience Q&A at the end of our program. For our students in the room, feel free to ask questions in the chat or unmute yourselves when the time comes. Okay, Ogden and Liam, I'm going to pass the mic over to you now.
Thank you for that introduction. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate everyone who has attended and the panelists that we're going to be speaking with. And I'll be asking the first question, which is, could folks take a few minutes to introduce themselves, talk about their current role, and can you tell us what you do with your day-to-day or what your day-to-day work is like? And I guess the last question, and I'll follow up if people forget, is, what brought you to library school? So I guess I'll start with who I see on my screen, and I'll start with Tamara.
Thank you. It's a reflection on how fluid taxonomy is, because with my last name, I've never been first in any lineup. So it's all fluid. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with, not to everyone, but to speak with everyone today. I'm the Director of Archival Partnerships at the American Jewish Historical Society. I would say that for most of the inclusion of partnerships in that title, rather than say donations, because I do deal with primarily external partnerships, i.e. the potential donors, both individually and institutionally, of materials that might come to our stewardship, is to try to re-envision the cycle and paradigm of stewarding archival materials, and that no matter the scope of the collection, the context of the creation of the materials, that both the repository and the donor or donors are partners in that endeavor. So I spend much of my time developing, implementing, and then maintaining or refining all of the policies and workflows that can support this paradigm and the transfer of archival collections to HHS, as we are more commonly known for long-term stewardship. We were founded in 1892, so we have a mandate to document the American Jewish experience, and like all long-standing mandates, it benefits from regular reassessment to ensure that we are trying to evolve and evolve and steward as much of that landscape as possible, which is, of course, it is an impossible task, but it's a very exciting threshold to work towards. So I spend much of my time meeting with donors in their spaces and understanding the needs of their collections, and then trying to identify resources to support those objectives.
And the last thing I would like to hear you talk about briefly is what brought you to library school?
So I actually came to this path through a graduate history program at NYU. And actually, I think in midstream, halfway through the program, there was a long boarding curriculum change that had been pushed through. So I was originally pursuing a master's in history with a certificate in archival management and historical editing, quite a mouthful. And subsequently, the program was streamlined, and it was a master's in archival management, full stop. So actually, there are areas of my background that gaps in knowledge have never quite been filled, because I didn't come through the library science route. So that actually continues to be a really interesting area of exploration for me.
Cool, thank you. And now I'm going to pass it on to Rebecca.
Hi everyone. So I'm a paper conservator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So I went to conservation school. I did not go to library school. And we are a pretty small department considering the amount of objects that we're responsible for. There are 21,000 drawings, I think, and like over 1 million prints just in the Department of Drawings and Prints. And then we work with works on paper that are in all of the museum's 17 curatorial departments, basically. And there's 5 of us. So we kind of work on a little bit of everything. And as you can imagine, there's not a lot of time for things outside of what's like urgently needed. So that is pretty much the loan and exhibition schedule. So conservators always say we, this is like a thing I found out. It's a habit I can't get out of. Anyway, I work on treatments of works on paper. So that includes, aesthetic and also structural repairs and all manner of treatments. And then a lot of condition documentation for objects that are going on loan or are coming back, exhibition installations, which are a nice sort of collaborative group activity. I'm not always just like in my lab at the microscope. There's a lot of teamwork involved. A lot of paperwork, a lot of meetings. At a place as big as the Met, you have all these administrative things outside of the actual bench work that you do. So I forget what else I was supposed to say, but I got interested in conservation. I think that was one of them. Actually, when I was in high school, which is a little unusual, although I deal with a lot of interns, I read a lot of applications, and it's becoming much more common. I can talk about this later if anyone's interested, for people to really know in college that they're interested in conservation and sort of tailor their college program to that. But when I was in school, I graduated grad school in 2007. It was pretty unusual. I had a after school job working for a paintings restorer. So I knew I wanted to go to grad school in conservation, and I majored in art history and almost minored in chemistry. I was one class short, which is a good program to have at Barnard.
Great. And from there, I'm going to pass it on to Lily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lily Brown. I graduated from Barnard in 2018, and I am currently a metadata librarian at Stanford, and I specifically work on creating catalog records for any book, or book is a loose term here, that I receive in a Hebrew language. So that's primarily Hebrew, but some Yiddish, Ladino, Judeo-Arabic. And I really, this is going to sound like I'm like paid to be here, but I promise I'm not. Well, that's not like a dig or anything. I mostly mean that like my Barnard experience is like a little bit inextricable from my library school experience, which is that I really didn't know that being a librarian like was a career path until the like really like interpersonal one-on-one experience with librarians at Barnard made that pretty clear to me. Like I was always in my personal librarian's inbox and spent a lot of time sort of extracurricularly at the archives. And my research for my thesis at Barnard really drew me to the idea that there are places that are repositories of information. And while I loved writing my thesis, I majored in history at Barnard, I was actually just way more drawn to the places where I was doing research and what those institutions are like. And really good advice that I got from librarians at Barnard was to do something else before deciding if library school was for you. And so then I worked in college admissions at Barnard for a little bit, and I have to say hi to Amanda because I was the person emailing her to come to events like this. So I really appreciate seeing you again on this end. And what I do on a day-to-day basis, I think I might have covered that, but if anyone has any questions about that, about what cataloging is, I'm happy to talk about it. But I will just add that for me, like what I sort of went to library school thinking I wanted to be an archivist. And what's great, I think, about library school is that it shows you to really the entire scope of the profession. I had no idea what metadata was. And if anyone doesn't know, that's okay. Really just like a title of a book is metadata. Data about data, haha. And for me, it is really important for folks to have comprehensive and equitable access to materials. And that's why I got into cataloging. And on that note, I'm also involved in the anti-racist description group here at Stanford. And I'm also happy to talk more about what that looks like as like a cross-departmental library experience.
Great. And I'm going to pass it on to Sophia and then finally Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Sophia. My pronouns are she and hers. I graduated from Barnard in 2006. Feels like so long ago. And it took me about 6 years after that to decide to go to library school, where I went to the University of Washington. And I wouldn't say that what I did at Barnard necessarily brought me to library school, because again, it was like 6 years later. But I was an English major, and you'll find that most librarians are often English or history majors. I worked as an academic librarian, like, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years, something like that. And I now currently work as a facilitator / like consultant to mostly academic libraries, although I've also worked with public libraries. And a lot of my work is about basically talking about how white supremacy and racism is part of the foundational systems of libraries. And then helping people find alternative frameworks to continue to do their library work. I can't remember if there was anything else I was supposed to address.
No, it was kind of like your day-to-day and like what brought you to library school.
Right. Well, now my day-to-day is really different. It just depends on when I get asked to do workshops or give talks. And actually right now I'm getting to teach a class at Pratt. So I'm actually at Pratt right now doing a class on community building and engagement, which is really fun. So potentially I might see you in a future class.
Was that everybody?
No,
I
Sarah.
can go ahead. Hi, I'm Sarah. I think I'm probably the most recent alum here. I graduated from Barnard in 2020. Great time to graduate from college, but I got my MLS this past December, so I just finished library school. And I'm currently working as a graduate fellow in the Queens College Special Collections and Archives. Queens College is where I got my MLS and certificate in archives, and the Special Collections there has a really close relationship with the library school. As well as doing that, I have another part-time job as an administrative assistant in a school. And I just wanted to mention that because there are a lot of kind of like part-time and temporary roles in the archives world, at least. And so it can be pretty common, especially earlier on, for people to have short-term or part-time roles. The day-to-day in my fellowship definitely varies. I started kind of the first half of it doing archival processing work on the collection of a former women's basketball coach at the college, which meant going through her professional papers, photographs, flyers, posters, correspondence, all that kind of stuff, and rehousing it in archival standard folders and boxes, seeing if there were any preservation needs, and working on description of the collection for a finding aid, which is kind of like the guide to an archival collection. While doing that, and more recently also, I've been curating an exhibit on the basketball coach. Her name is Lucille Cavalos, and her kind of professional legacy and connection to the college, and that's up in the library at Queens College now. And I'm also helping plan a Wikipedia edit-a-thon with other librarians to help people learn how to edit Wikipedia, and the topic for that is women in sports. So it's kind of been like a through line throughout the fellowship, and it's been really fun. Kind of echoing Lily, my time at Barnard was like instrumental in why I chose this career path. I took a class called Religion in the Archives with Gail Kenny in the religion department, which is how I ended up meeting the Barnard Archivists, and I ended up working for a couple of years as an undergrad in the Barnard Archives, which made me decide I wanted to be an archivist and pursue this field. And yes, love Gail. Yeah, so that's why I went to library school.
Thank you. Our next question is a really, you've sort of all spoken to it a little bit, so I'm going to encourage you to sort of either go deeper or think more broadly or adjacently about this question, which is the connection between what you studied at Barnard, and what you majored in, and what your job is, or maybe just sort of thinking about librarianship and information science and archives and their relationship to liberal arts. So I encourage you to be really expansive about how you approach that question, since so many of you really did speak to it already. Should we go in opposite order and start with you, Sarah?
Sure. So going a little deeper, I majored in English, which, as Sophia said, is like pretty common. And I minored in WGSS, which is also very common at Barnard in particular. And I think both of those areas of study have informed and overlapped with some of my work in archives and libraries so far. I think my like knowledge and understanding of those fields has been something I've been able to talk about in job interviews, like for the fellowship that I'm doing right now, the women's and gender studies, like knowledge that I had was part of the reason that they chose me for the fellowship that I'm doing in particular. In terms of the English degree, just, you know, having and being in college in general, having good writing skills like is always a great asset in this field, I think. But I also was last year a graduate fellow in the Barnard Archives, which was awesome. And I did a project about using archival materials in creative writing classes. So I think I chose that as a topic because of like my interest in English and creative writing. But I think it can definitely, you know, even if you're not like specifically a librarian in your subject area or something like that, things do apply.
I think I was before Sarah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. Yeah, I guess, I don't know if this is the answer that Barnard folks want to hear, but I actually don't know how much my being at Barnard affected my decision to go to library school. I mean, of course, being an English major and some of the things that Sarah discussed about critical thinking and analysis, that does come into play. But actually a lot of the things that I've learned now that influence a lot of my work is things that I came to like outside of formal education. And a lot of my work is guided by lived experience of my own and other people of color. And a lot of the like theorists and scholars and practitioners that continue to guide my work are ones that I came across, again, like outside of formal education. So I definitely recommend like reading more widely outside of like what, you know, your faculty are giving you on your syllabi. To be honest, I didn't really have the same understanding of the world when I was, you know, at Barnard. I feel like I was like still very naive and young and like, oh, having this like very different idea of what I thought I was going to be doing and how I was going to be perceived. So I'm sure that I feel like at least this generation of people are much more aware and awoken to a lot of things that I wish I had been at that age.
Thank you. Lily.
I really appreciate you saying that, Sophia, because I think also like attention in like this field is a master's degree necessary or even like conducive to the work that we want to do. And I also went to University of Washington, and I'm not sure for library school, and I'm not sure if this discussion was happening when you were there, Sophia, but it's kind of like a we're doing it because we have to, and like the belief system kind of is that formal education isn't what we do as librarians isn't necessarily trackable within formal education, and that a lot of what library school students I think are thinking about right now is like information systems as a way to replicate systems of oppression. And so what does that mean if we're all in a graduate program that is like an inherently gatekeeping society or system, I guess, in terms of higher education? So I think that like there is that tension of like we have to be highly educated in order to have this be in this profession. And that was at least my recent experience in library school. But to pivot a little bit, I do just want to say that what I do is like with Hebrew language materials is only because I did formal Jewish education for 12 years and then also at Barnard through the double degree program with JTS. So I definitely wouldn't have my like language skills or like content skills to do my job without those. And I also want to say that like in terms of Liam's part of question of liberal arts, like yes, a ton of people major in English and history at library school, but if there's anyone in here who is like a math major or really anything like this, there is space for you in library school. Like it is such a wide field. And also like there are such things as like data librarians and folks who help. I don't know if anyone here like goes to the Empirical Reasoning Center, but that I think is a great example of librarianship at Barnard that looks more like numbers than words. And like there are lots of paths to follow. Don't like leave STEM because you want to be a librarian, please.
1000%. Rebecca, I believe you're next.
Yeah, so like I said, I was interested in becoming a conservator before I even got to Barnard, but I thought, well, let me just try out art history, see if I like it. And I did. I really, really liked it. And let me try out the chemistry, see if I can do it. And I can't say I loved it, but I did find it very rewarding and challenging in a good way. And to be a conservator, you really need three things. You don't have to be a scientist, but you need to not be scared of the science part. And you don't have to be an art historian, but you have to engage with the works and with the art historical context. And you don't need to be a fine artist, but you do need to have hand skills and you do need to want to work with your hands. So if you have a combination of all those, there are, within the field of conservation, people sort of go on different tracks. Some people focus more on developing new treatments and dealing with the materials that we use in conservation, like the physical materials, there's a lot of research in gels right now used for conservation, all kinds of new technologies. Some people deal more with the art history or the philosophical or the ethical side of things. And that's more me. That's what I researched more on artist materials and techniques and philosophical issues. And some people just do their work and, kind of just do the day-to-day, and that's fine too. So there's a lot of different ways that your studies can sort of make you think about what kind of a track you want to be on in conservation. And in terms of whether or not graduate school is necessary, I don't think there's not that much of a discussion right now about whether we should be opening the field up more to allow people that don't go to graduate school, but there's definitely a lot of interest in opening up the graduate programs, opening up internships, making them more accessible, making sure they're paid so that not only, a particular demographic can participate in them, but the field is pretty limited. There's only really 3 graduate schools in the United States.
Thank you. Excellent. Tamar.
It's very illuminating actually to come at the end. I'll try not to replicate what my co-panelists have already spoken about so eloquently, a lot of food for thought. The aspect of my Barnard experience that is standing out now in this context is not a formal class, but actually having served as a writing fellow because it prioritized listening, really, like truly trying to listen, not just to gauge what the assignment is or to gauge what your peers coming in having written or typed down, but really to sit with them as they're working through what they're trying to express and what they're trying to address within the parameters of the class. Much of my formal archival training and then formal and informal sort of apprenticeships thereafter really I thought that the focal point was always going to be the collections themselves, and indeed from an appraisal, preservation, description, indexing, etc., all various technical terms, those are all, I value all of that exposure, and indeed I think given the current expectations of the field, I would have been hard pressed to have achieved some of that on my own. But I have great faith in the current generation of enterprising information managers and advocates who might have been able to gain more access to that on their own. But the writing fellows experience I see now was a little bit of a seed that expanded and kind of problematized my initial worldview about archives, that it is the collections, but in service of the collections, you need to listen to people. Yes, the creators of those records, and if they're past or present, but also think about the audiences that you're trying to reach, for whom these archives are being preserved and hopefully disseminated. So that's really a takeaway from my Barnard experience that I think has relevance for my work today.
Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you for those really poignant and well thought out responses. And I think to follow up on this question, what we wanted to ask next is, what advice would you give to students who are interested in pursuing librarianship? And I've heard some answers in regard to this, and maybe we can just further those thoughts. But for students who are interested in pursuing librarianship and archival work and conservation work, what advice would folks provide? And I guess it makes sense to go in reverse order, and greatly enough, the folks that have a lot of experience in this will read like tomorrow. So go ahead.
All right. And this always runs the risk of sounding very cliche, but I think really not being afraid to create or to activate a network. I finished graduate school at the peak of the most recent recession besides this one in 2009. And I had come out with no formal archival experience, and I was scrambling to figure out how to both support myself, which is no small concern or consideration, as well as to sort of build upon the theoretical experience that I'd had in graduate school. And it really was by the grace of being able to reach out to people and people that I had never met. I contacted graduate programs, I contacted faculty at other places, explained that I was interested in the field and that I was looking for experience and exposure. And of course, this is a suggestion that puts a lot of the burden on the person looking to break into the field. I recognize that, but I think that there really is like an incalculable benefit to not being afraid to reach out, not being afraid to ask for help, both not just when you are interested in breaking into the field, but also as a practitioner, because there really is a sort of a mutual aid thread that runs through so much of librarianship, archives, taxonomy, all of these aligned fields to help support that. Another element that I think could be very valuable in this regard is experience like with systems. It doesn't necessarily have to be technical systems. Obviously, being a data librarian is a particular set of skills, but being able to look at a situation or look at a potential challenge and say, okay, what are the issues at hand and what are the goals that we're trying to reach? A system, in this case, a particular tool, is agnostic. It's a means to an end, not to go in and say, okay, you know, Excel or this particular sort of data management system is the answer to something, but coming in and knowing what questions to ask, I have found really touches upon all aspects, whether you are dealing primarily in a more technical vein, or if you're on the front lines of public services in a library and you're dealing with all sorts of diverse audiences and needs.
Thank you for that response, and I'm going to pass it on to Rebecca.
So this probably goes without saying, but I would, if you're interested in conservation, I would definitely recommend finding out as much as you can about it through online research. Like, all of this information is out there. There's the American Institute for Conservation, which is our major national organization. There's international organizations. When I was in college, the graduate programs barely had websites, and now, you know, it's very extensive. They'll tell you the different requirements for them, obviously. And you can find out a lot about conservation on museum websites. Like, they'll have sections on conservation projects that are going on, just to get a sense of the field. And most of the graduate programs require internships of some kind, which are much more available now than when I was in college also. And I would say it's not necessary to have an internship at the Met or a major museum, but any kind of experience, whether it's in conservation, in registrars, which is another part of the museum that deals with objects, and collections management, even in art handling or framing, you know, these are all like sort of adjacent areas that you can learn something. And it's not about proving that you already know everything about conservation, but that you understand the field as a whole, and you understand the limitations of what you've been able to learn so far, and you have a sense of where you are sort of in the journey of learning to be a conservator. So yes, that's what I would recommend.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to prioritize Sophia, just because our next question is geared towards emerging professionals like Lily and Sarah. And therefore, Sophia, I would love to hear what advice you would have as well.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like this is a big question for me, and kind of a difficult one, right? Because to a degree, I've like left working in a regular library job, and there's a lot of reasons for that. A few of the things I do want to say about this is, I think it's really important to know before you decide to go into library school, because it is expensive. You will go into debt, and the jobs that are at the end of that are not always that high paying. And there's not a ton of job security. And I think it also, you know, is important to know that the profession is like 88% white, as you can see from this panel, right? I think that's another important thing to know before you go into libraries. I'm pretty sure that's similar in museums. The other thing I would note too is, like, I don't know if this is still true. I graduated from library school in 2014, but there's, you know, still this idea that libraries are somehow neutral, and that affects a lot of what we're taught in library school, the ways in which we're supposed to understand how we do our work. And again, that's obviously not true, right? Libraries are definitely not neutral. Anything created by a person is not neutral. And so I think it's important to understand like those three things before going into library school. Not to say that that's not true in other professions, right? I don't think that's untrue either. But I think those are the things I wish I had known before going into library school.
Thank you. And now I'll pass it on to Lily.
Those are really great points, Sophia. And I think I'll say that like a lot of the coursework that I experienced, at least at University of Washington, like does depart from libraries are neutral. So I think that curriculum at some institutions maybe changing. I'm not I can't speak for other library programs. Obviously, I definitely don't recommend getting like 2 MLISs. I don't think you can, but I think that there are a lot of programs to choose from. I think most of them do not require the GRE anymore. That was my priority for applying to programs, was if they required the GRE or not. So I would also do that sort of research in terms of testing requirements. And I still really believe this. I know I said it earlier, but if you know that you want to be, especially a librarian, I think conservation school is definitely very different, Rebecca. So I'm glad that you're here too. But I think if you are like, oh, maybe this could be a cool career for me, like I really do recommend trying other industries out first, or jobs out first. It's really rare. The majority of folks in your cohort are not going to be straight from undergrad. It's most people do other things before coming to library school. Which isn't to say like if you're an undergrad, if you come straight from undergrad, you'll be unsuccessful. I just think that there are a lot of perspectives coming into library school. And I think that it's better for the industry for folks to do other things and not be so tunnel vision on these systems before coming in. And in terms of getting into debt, I think it's a little bit inevitable. There are definitely scholarship programs at schools, but they're pretty few and far between. I would definitely do your research and maybe apply to schools that have scholarship programs that work for you only, but it is good to know about. And I don't think they'll be getting forgiven. So there's that.
And then Sarah.
Yeah, as I said, I'm a very recent graduate. So like you said, Ovden, I think my perspective is very different from everyone else on the panel who has more experience. And I actually spoke to some people on the panel when I was interested in looking at library school. And so kind of like what Tamara said earlier, Tamara was one of the people I spoke to before going to library school. Yeah, just talking to people and understanding like what you are going into before you do it. Like I said, I went to Queens College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies. I'm an advocate of that program. It is a CUNY program. So financially, it's a much better situation than some of the other, at least New York-based library schools. So if you are interested in library school and trying to figure out financial options, I recommend checking out Queens. But yeah, one of the things I appreciated most about library school was the variety of people in terms of age, background, professional experience, what people had going on in their lives. And what I really valued was being able to connect and build community in library school. And I think that's probably what I got the most out of while I was there.
Thank you. So we have about 5-6 minutes left for this portion of our conversation, and then we'll move to questions. So I'm going to put a question out there, and whoever wants to speak to it can, maybe two of you. So with that in mind, our last question is about your hopes, both for your own career, what you might imagine happening, or what you envision doing with the rest of as your career develops, and also your hopes for the profession, whatever profession it is that you identify as your location in general, what you would like to see for. We've talked a little bit about kind of the limits and the problems, and that always gestures towards aspirations for something different. So I'm curious to hear about what people think about that. So jump in if you want to take a stab at that. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, one thing just about having the actual job, not necessarily the field of conservation, is that within museums right now, I mean, this is sort of a New York City thing, but it's a national thing. There's a trend of unionization, and people sort of abandoning that idea that you're this academic worker, you should be grateful just to have this very special job in this rarefied field, and really, considering yourself part of the the ecosystem of the museum, along with everyone from security to the front of house people. And it's really wonderful. So I hope that continues and continues to have success.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, then I'll call on you. Is that okay? So, Sophia, what are you hoping for your own professional trajectory and librarianship in general?
Sure, thanks, Liam. I don't know about my own career because it's not gone in a direction that I thought it would go at all. And so I can't even really say where I think it'll go or what I hope for it. What I hope for the field and the profession is that, oh my God, so many things. I think the ways in which we think about the work that we're doing and that it is harming people. And so how do we shift that and move away from the way that we've currently been doing things and understanding the history and context behind the work we do, right? There's just so much behind that I wished I had learned in library school that we didn't talk about. And it sounds like things are changing, right? According to Lily's experience, which is great. And I wish I had had that experience. And I think with a lot of librarianship, it's very focused on the practical, right? Of oh, how will we get this done? Because this thing needs to be done, and that's fair. But because we are not questioning the ways in which we've always done things, then we're continuing to perpetuate white supremacy and racism across all of the systems that we use, across our daily practices. And so I do hope that the profession takes time to think about what it's done and what it's continuing to do, and hopefully start shifting in directions that move towards racial justice, social justice, eradicating all forms of oppression. Because to a degree, I think the profession believes that it's doing that, and for the most part, it's not.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to jump in? Either general hopes or hopes for their own shape of their own career? We have time for maybe one more person to say something, then we'll go into the Q&A. Sarah or Tamar?
Yeah, sure. I can say something really quick. Yeah, I feel like was interesting to go to library school during COVID, and see the ways that people had to adjust, the program, their expectations of the field, of what we should be learning about, what people need from library and information professionals in the world, and how that's continuing to shift. And also I being at an institution and seeing as people started to talk about oh, we're coming out of COVID, which is not true. But that kind of rhetoric, and then using that as an excuse to be okay, we have to go back to things we were doing in the program before. And something that I'm really grateful for from my time in library school is, like I said, being able to connect with other students who were pushing back against that kind of rhetoric, and trying to advocate for more permanent changes that would really benefit, the people who are going to be going into the field, and also just changing the curriculum more generally. One thing that I think kind of connects to something people have said before is a common requirement of library schools in general is having a work experience as a class, which often historically has been like an unpaid internship experience. Now most internships, depending on where you live, are starting to, at least have a stipend or pay minimum wage, but not all of them. And the fact that that's still a requirement at a lot of schools is really tenuous subject. And I think that's something that I'm seeing like being questioned in the Queen's program, at least. So I hope that changes. Like having to pay to get a work experience.
Thank you very much. So we wanted to leave enough time for Q&A. I'm also aware that we're sort of in an awkward moment where everybody but Tamar has spoken on this. So do you have any kind of burning thoughts about what you might want to add to this before we move to the Q&A?
Sorry. Just an overall hope for, I guess, on a macro and micro level, to move from a reactive stance to a proactive stance, both from a over-reliance on contingent labor, but also on throwing a lot of resources at things that promise to be long-term solutions for addressing like preservation issues, all of which of course are, that's part of the archive's mandate, is to preserve things, but to sort of be very astute and nuanced about where those resources are going, and think like, are we investing in people, not just the buildings and the environmental systems, again, all of which are crucial, that uphold and maintain the collections, but how are we sustaining the people who are going to be making the decisions about those collections long after the resource allocators today. So it's like trying to find more transparent and scalable ways of two types of thinking, the medium term, short term and long term. You would think that long-term thinking sort of comes with the territory of choosing a profession that deals with, keeping things for the future. But in fact, we all are bringing our biases to every aspect of it, and that is reflected in the resource allocation decisions that are made today. So having more best practices sort of act to reform, to think about the maintenance and not just the new.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate this through line of imagining a world that is more just and more sustainable and more humane. And I'll turn over to Obden, who's gonna help us with this question and answer portion.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate the same through line of increased criticality within the profession and the ability to ask questions and challenging the silences that we have within the profession, which I think is incredibly important and is part of the struggle of having that more within our space. But with that, I'm going to go into some of the questions that we do have, and please continue adding them to the chat as we go along. And so the first question is, what fields did you explore or wish you explored before deciding to go to library school? And this is being posed by Laura Durante.
Since I've touted this advice, I guess I'll answer. Yeah, so when I first graduated from college, I had like a part-time job at an archive in the Center for Jewish History, which I believe is where AJHS is. So, it was great. Like, it was very formative, but it just wasn't sustainable financially for me. And they put me at a certain amount of hours, so I wasn't entitled to benefits or healthcare. It was fabulous. So once I decided that I needed healthcare, I pivoted to a union job at Barnard in the admissions office here, which taught me a lot, and a lot of it was that I wanted to go back to the information space. But to be frank, I had plans to kind of take more time between undergrad and grad school, but it was March 2020 when I was thinking about applying. And so I just decided it's everyone who was around and who was in graduate school in the 2008 recession told me that going to grad school in a time of panic is somewhat a good idea. So I decided to kind of shift earlier. I think other things that I wish that I appreciated working in admissions because it did give me just like general office experience, which is definitely a critiquable skill. But I think it does benefit me in like working in a team, all of that. And I think really the advice is because it is a time commitment and it is expensive, and we have to have this degree in order to have these jobs. Like in our current economy, like lawyers have to go to grad school to have the jobs that they want, but they're paid like astronomical amounts in order to repay their debt. And that's just not something that librarians or archivists or information professionals are afforded. So the advice really is like, also that was like a great money saving opportunity for me before going to grad school. So that's mostly why I advise exploring other opportunities, because I don't regret my career choice, but there are definitely monetary and long-term pitfalls that I have sort of eaten in that choice.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Is there anyone else that would like to respond to this question?
Yeah, I can. Let's see, what did I do? I worked at a nonprofit. I've worked as a cook. I worked in a bakery, retail, publishing, a lot of different things. And I do appreciate that time where I explored like before going into library school. And I do want to say, even though nobody asked me this, because I do feel like I've been like a Debbie Downer this whole panel, and I don't want it to seem like, oh, why is she even a librarian still? Like, why does she still do this work? And part of it is like, I've met some of my favorite people working in libraries. Like I found a lot of community in libraries that I don't know that I would have found outside of working in a library. And so like, that is part of why I'm still in the profession, I guess, to a degree. So I just wanted to say that, so nobody's like bringing things down all the time.
This point, one role that I had more concretely beforehand, I still plays in now, I guess, to my role, is that I did a lot of translation. Definitely discovered that there were some literary forms that I had never mastered, even at Barnard. But you know, that was really, it's such a self-directed kind of role. I mean, I had been told that like, if you're going to be an archivist, there's the cliche that you're going to be alone in a dusty basement. It's always dusty. The New York Times will have an annual article about archives, and dusty will appear in the first 3 paragraphs. They're contractually obliged. But that was a much more sort of, you know, isolating role, the translation, but it really honed like project and time management skills. And then now in an archive, it's a small team, but it is a team. And it's been valuable to have experience on both, because there are impressions or reputations that all of these fields have. And like any reputation, there are probably elements of truth in it, but really it can all be problematized upon closer view. So that it just burnishes overall the value of having those other roles.
Thank you for that. And we have one final question. And before that, I would like to like briefly plug, you know, in connection to this, we have a program that's happening on April 13th at 2 p.m. in Milstein at 225, which is, so you want to be an archivist or a librarian, so you can hear experiences from Blaze staff about their careers. And so this is another opportunity to continue this conversation. And with that, I want to go to the final question from Christina, which is, how have you seen librarianship change or adapt to more digital collections or the digital humanities? And I imagine that we can have like 1 or 2 responses to this.
I can start again. Yeah, I think that digital access is something that is like very much a hot topic in librarianship and information worlds right now, both as, I mean, but I think it has like all digital initiatives, like it has really apparent pros and also apparent cons. And I think that at least I thought my library school experience did kind of hold those two together. Like I took a digital preservation class, and digital preservation is like everyone as a user, that's all you want. Like all you want is to be able to just like sit, I'm maybe making assumptions, but like sit on your couch and like access books on another hemisphere from where you are. And like, that's beautiful. And I'm so glad that that exists. But the labor it takes to do digital preservation is like pretty demanding, and is not as, the workflows are constantly being reinvented because it is always a new and emerging problem in each individual institution. So like the way that like Barnard Archives or the Barnard Library might do digital preservation cannot necessarily be mimicked everywhere else that wants to do digital preservation. So I think there's that aspect of it. And also like maybe in 10 years that no one will use PDFs, like it's hard to know. So there's that, but also it does increase access. So it is worth pursuing. But from a digital humanities perspective, I definitely recommend going to the Digital Humanities Center at Milstein to learn more about that. I'm like definitely not an expert in it, but I wouldn't know what digital humanities was if it weren't for that center in Milstein. So, oh, well, Christina, fantastic.
So we have 2 minutes left. Should we just give a moment for closing thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump back in here. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists for joining us today and providing such thoughtful insight. I'll be putting everyone in one email just for our panelists so that contact information can be exchanged amongst you guys. I also want to thank our moderators, Ogden and Liam. Thank you so much for taking the time and care to lead this event and preparing it alongside me. A reminder to our students that you will be getting a recording of this event. We hope to see you at our next Career Insights, Careers for Creative Writing Majors, April 26th, 1 to 2 p.m. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again to our panelists and moderators. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good luck, everybody.